Hey, it's Joe. Today I am pleased to present my conversation with Professor Olle Johansson, a global authority in the field of electromagnetic radiation and health effects. I reached out to Professor Johansson to clear the air on what's real and what's hyperbole on the dangers of non-native electromagnetic fields that each and every one of us are exposed to 24 hours a day. Are they safe? Is there a threshold of damage that is tolerable? Am I injuring myself by carelessly exposing myself to unmanaged levels of this non-ionizing radiation from my cell phone and my Wi-Fi at work and at home and my Bluetooth devices, including ones that I have in my ears all day long? Okay, so I'm late to investigating this topic as I have been skeptical about these unfelt and unseen dangers. But after my conversation with Professor Johansson, I now include non-native EMF as another form of pollution that I need to minimize, along with microplastics and heavy metals and pesticides, forever chemicals, secondhand smoke, and the like. A key part of this discussion is Professor Johansson's advice on what are the easiest things that we could do to be careful. You might choose to do more, but these are steps you should take to protect yourself and your family, especially children. Oh, and one more thing. Professor Johansson asked me to share with you information regarding fundraising for his research projects, so links for that are in the show notes. Please support this work. All right, so let's talk to Professor Olle Johansson. Professor Olle Johansson, welcome to the Wise Athletes Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Did I pronounce your name well?
Oh, well enough. Thank you.
It's a tough one, but it's an impressive name, so I wanted to get it right. Well, thank you for joining us. As I said, I have to admit that I've been a bit tardy in approaching this subject. I'll just admit that it's just always seemed a bit crazy to me. I just couldn't bring myself to believe that it was a big deal. So let's just say that I've long been skeptical of the dangers of these unseen and unfelt harms. And to some extent, I've been preconditioned to not believe this stuff, because ever since I've been a kid, I've been hearing about you're going to get cancer from being around power lines, right? And then nothing ever really seemed to come of that. And so, this fear-mongering thing is big business, and the whole conspiracy theory thing is just totally out of control. And so long ago, I decided I'm not believing extreme things without extreme evidence. I mean, that seems sensible. But I have learned some things in the last year or two that have made me think, you know what? I wonder if I am missing an opportunity to protect myself just in case. I mean, yeah, I don't have perfect information, but maybe there's really enough information out there if I looked for it that would say I should be careful here. I should do at least the least protection of myself and my family that I could. And so I decided it was time to talk to an expert, and I found you.
Thank you.
So tell our audience about yourself. How did you get involved in the study of biological effects of electromagnetic fields, and how did you do in coming up with answers?
Well, I was working my whole life. I'm retired now at the Karolinska Institute here in Stockholm, Sweden, and also for some years at the Royal Institute of Technology, also here in Stockholm. And my position was in basic and applied neuroscience, meaning I know a little bit about the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves in our body. And then automatically you also get interested in all the so-called target cells like the immune system, the skin, the joints, etc. And one evening, and this was in the beginning of the 1980s, it's a long time ago, I was about to leave my laboratory and I was alone. Someone had left the radio on and I never actually listened to radio. So I decided to turn it off. And while I approached it, I heard a lady, Kajsa Vedin is her name, and she worked on the west coast of Sweden in the town of Göteborg and for the trade unions. And she was talking about a new type of patients, which she called electrical allergic patients. And she was asking for expertise in clinical neurology. I am not a clinical neurologist, but being a neuroscientist, I thought it was close enough. And I got interested because a few years before I had listened to demonstrations regarding the impact of so-called microwaves you use for telecommunication, on something called the blood-brain barrier and leakage when it was exposed to these electromagnetic fields. So I was also sort of prepared to listen, and I called her the day after, and we decided to meet. And this is really the reason why we talk today, because this expanded into being interested in the health as well as biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields. And as you said, people, they have a lot of gadgets and devices back home in the workplace or places of leisure, and they buy them like cell phones, tablets, smart meters, etc., baby alarms, and they are always sold as being 100% safe. But when you look into it, then you realize that all these actors on the scene, they have different forms of precautionary principles, private ones. For instance, all the world's insurance and reinsurance companies do not take any form of responsibility for these health effects of the gadgets that are sold as safe to you. And they haven't done that for more than 25 years. And the same with the manufacturers, the operators of telecom technology, they do not take any form of responsibility of their so-called safe gadgets. And you can also see the same, for instance, with radiation protection boards and authorities around the world telling you to keep your cell phone away from your body and to minimize the length of the calls and so on. But in the store, they don't tell you anything about this. Just go ahead, buy and use as much as you want to. And you also said, and then we will have to move to Geneva in Switzerland, where you have the World Health Organization. 2001, they cancer classified exposure from power frequent magnetic fields. And that's a long name for household electricity, like from power lines, and its association with childhood leukemia. 10 years later on, they went into the radio frequent fields where you find, for instance, your cell phone, and its association with certain types of brain tumors. Again, cancer classifying these as possible carcinogens. And these classifications are still there. And the regular consumer or user, of course, they don't know anything about this. They are not informed. But all these different levels of our society, they have left the ship, and the consumers, they are there quite alone, I would say. And this is important to think about in the future. Maybe someone contracts like a brain tumor and they want to have legal as well as economical compensation, and then they will find the ship empty. There will be a very, very hard time to get any such compensation. And at a few times, for instance, in Italy, here in Europe, successful legal cases has been brought through the entire system, including the Supreme Court, and they decided that the brain tumor was caused by the cell phone. Going back, also you have to remember that the cell phone gives off the communicative signals, the microwaves, but it's also a tremendously strong source of magnetic fields in the power frequency range. And again, you don't see it, you don't understand, you have to measure it. And therefore, the recommendation in the meantime, until we could sort of raise the green flag instead of the red flag, is to keep these gadgets away from you as long as you can, and also use rather shielded devices and devices that use shielded cabling instead of having wireless systems. And finally, one very interesting thing which I learned at a conference in 2002 in London, and you had the representatives of the insurance and reinsurance industry there, for instance, Lloyd's UK, which is the largest insurance dealer in the world, and Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance dealer. And they all said, quite openly, I must say, and they had also been interviewed the years before, and they had been very honest about it, that for them, it was not the question whether the radiation from these devices was harmful or dangerous. They knew it was dangerous. For them, it was only a question who is going to pay for the compensations in the future. And they said openly, no, we will not do it. We will leave that to the industry to cover such liability issues. And I remember there was a lawyer there, and he talked to representatives from the big telecom manufacturers like Ericsson in Sweden, Nokia in Finland, and so on, and they were scared. I mean, they were really white in their faces. They were really scared because suddenly they had got this hot potato in the lap, and it took them 5 years to come up with a solution, namely, and again, your audience now, they will believe that this is like a grim joke, but it's not. When you buy any form of wireless gadget, like a tablet, a laptop, or a cell phone, or an indoor decked phone, it says that you have to always keep it at least 1 or several inches away from your body. Some people read it says from your head. No. It's from your body. And it has an legal implication, which is so interesting. And in a way, I bow to these companies finding a solution how to protect themselves. Namely, when you go to your store, you pick out the cell phone in a cardboard box, you can never touch it. Because the moment you touch it, you have violated the instructions to the consumer, instructions which nowadays are up in this famous cloud, and which people never read. But it says, always keep it at least 1 inch away from your body. And your hands are part of your body, so you just have to do it. And if you don't, then you have violated the instructions you got.
And so I guess they're going to say it's your own fault if you had a problem.
They will use that against you, of course. And therefore, from a scientific point of view, the most common question I get is actually from a mother or father that will ask me, I've just bought this new cell phone for my son or daughter. Is it safe? And since I'm a very blunt and bold Swede, and also with a streak of Asperger, I cannot lie. I have to tell them, no, it is not. There are a lot of precautionary principles here in play, which you don't know about until I tell you. So it's not safe. And all these big players, they have known it's not safe for many, many years or even decades. So to protect yourself and your loved ones, it's a good idea to start thinking, do we need to always spend time with these wireless gadgets and with other electromagnetic sources, etc., and kind of go through your home, your workplace, your place of leisure, and minimize as much as you can. But from a scientific point of view, I cannot guarantee it's enough. The only hygienic safety level ever proposed was proposed by myself in 1997, namely the so-called natural background. And if we look, for instance, on so-called power frequent fields or power lines, the household electricity, that's the smallest increase compared to natural background. It's only today 100 million times higher.
Wow.
On average, where you sit, where I sit, where your audience is right now, The bigger increases are, of course, if we look on the telecommunication signals, the microwaves. Again, there are background signals, and today we allow the exposure in the US, in Sweden, and most countries. If we only look on the 3rd generation mobile telephony, we forget about all the other systems, only the third generation, it's allowed to expose you a quintillion times more than the natural background. And a quintillion is 1 with 18 zeros. So it's
It's a lot.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's today's English understatement, I would say. I use words like astronomically high, biblically high, colossal, and so on, and still it feels it's not enough. It's hard even for an academic scientist to really understand. Just imagine, for instance, when you wake up tomorrow, that the outdoor temperature would have increased 10 up to the power 18. Then not only you and your loved ones would immediately disappear in fire, but actually the entire planet Earth. So these exposures, they are very, very difficult to understand. And therefore, you see a lot of effects in biology and also in humans that could be explained only by these exposure parameters. And I have just now submitted, and it's accepted today, yet another article about the exposure of bacteria. And things are happening right as we speak, you know.
Yeah, I've heard you say that the electromagnetic fields are damaging the bacteria also, but they evolve so quickly. They have evolved to be stronger, and it's making them antibiotic resistant.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call that they are destroyed. They use these colossal energy feeds to develop new strains that could actually benefit from the extra energy,
Oh,
and they
wow.
become antibiotic resistant and in a very fast pace. And when you talk to medical doctors, they are quite alarmed by this because it hampers their possibility to treat even regular infections, and like a splinter in your thumb, suddenly it becomes a situation which is clinically very difficult to treat. So the future just now could be changed because of this.
All right. So I think for our conversation today, we're going to have to constrain ourselves, limit the discussion in certain ways. And what you're describing sounds like a potential for terrible outcomes. If we lose access to antibiotics,
Yeah,
that's going to be very bad.
yeah,
But let's don't go down that path just today. What I'd like to do today is just talk about helping people to get a sense that there's something to this. Okay, yeah, maybe you should write to your congressman, but the most direct thing you can do for yourself, that I could do for myself, is some of these few basic things that we'll learn about here today to protect ourselves, to get it from a quadrillion down to a million or something. And maybe that's not enough, but at least it's got to be a movement in the right direction. And so I'm not sure exactly what to cover, but I'd like to cover talking about what are some of these effects, right? We've talked about cancer, and actually I think childhood leukemia, I think, is thought to be a real connection. But cancer in people is thought to not be the big thing, but there's a variety of issues that seem to be, or some people you maybe believe are connected to these fields. And we ought to distinguish some, mechanistic basics for this, as well as talk about maybe the difference between natural electromagnetic fields and unnatural electromagnetic fields. And so I guess what I want to say is that everybody listening here is already aware that there are dangers from invisible, unfelt things, right? Everybody's worried about getting a sunburn, right? They go outside and they get too much UVB or UVA, I don't know which, and their skin gets red and the skin dies and it falls off, and and now they're going to worry about wrinkles and skin cancer. And so, they're supposed to wear a hat and you're supposed to wear sunscreen and all of those things. So we're aware of some of these things. And the good news is that our biology has evolved with these things and is pretty good at dealing with it. In fact, I want to talk about near infrared light here for a second. Near infrared light is another one of these electromagnetic waves that if you're outside, you're getting it all of the time that the sun is shining. And people I've had on the podcast here recently have said your body uses that energy for itself, to give itself energy. And one of the problems that we have is that we're inside all the time and we don't use incandescent bulbs anymore. So we're not making any of this near infrared light. And one of the positive consequences of that is that when you use a near infrared lamp, like I do on my joints, you get this amazing benefit, that really is just what you could get if you were outside in the sun or in the shade, but outside. But this near infrared light shining on my joints accelerates the healing somehow. I don't even know how. In fact, that's the one thing that got me over the hump of saying, my gosh, there's something to this. There's something here, because when I use those lamps on my joints, I heal faster and I can work out more. But that's an invisible, unfelt thing that somehow is affecting my biology. In this way, it's a good thing, but maybe that's because it's a natural electromagnetic field that my body is expecting to get, and it knows what to do with it, whether it's to protect itself or to utilize it in some way. I wonder if you could give us a little more about what are the different ways that an unnatural field is different, and why does that matter, and how does it affect our biology in a way that shows up how, like this allergy thing? What is it like? Is it like an allergy, or is it really like an allergy? Like it's the immune system somehow.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned this near infrared light treatment, because, as you know, especially in professional athlete businesses where they have different damages to joints, legs, muscles, and so on, they use actually power frequent magnetic fields to speed up the healing process. And it might be that from your lamp, you also get power frequent magnetic fields, that is actually the real positive culprit helping you. And regardless, I mean, we need to investigate all of this much more in detail, of course, because we have only guesses how it interacts with cells and cell membranes, mitochondria, with ionic channels, oxidative stress in cells, etc. We don't know very much about it yet. There are a number of papers, but they don't really fit all together. But you pointed to something similar and else at the same time. Being an athlete, you are, of course, extremely well trained, not only at the sort of physical level, but also at the cellular level, the molecular level. You know what to eat and what not to eat. You wouldn't smoke 3 packages per day. You don't use a lot of drugs or medicine and so on. And this is a real critical question. Should I throw my cell phone out through the window, or should I stop being a lazy, fat person sitting in front of the television? Should I stop smoking a lot, only driving a car, never walk? Where should I put my energy and money? And today, I would say that you should look into the entire life situation and spend much more time on exercise, diet, food, water intake, skip alcohol, skip sweet sodas, that kind of thing, and fast food that are not good for you, all the carbohydrates that you don't need, etc., etc. There is so much to do there. And also, this is very interesting, because I mentioned before that you have persons that was used to be called electrical allergy people, but nowadays we call them electrohypersensitive, and they are a disability or functional impairment. And it's not very uncommon that people will call me and tell me about that they have become electrohypersensitive. And for them, it was not only a negative sensation, because it drove them to buy a dog, make very long walks, etc., because they had a hard time being inside of the modern society. And as you say, when you sit there at your desk, your laptop, your television, you lose a lot of natural exposures. And I think that's a common realization, that the fields we're talking about, like from a cell phone, they are not only very, very strong, but they're also very, very artificial, actually to a level where they are completely artificial compared to the natural corresponding signals. And that has led me and others to also point to that if we talk about an increase like 100 million times or a quintillion times, it is actually much, much bigger, because these fields we're talking about from cell phone telecommunication, you have never seen them on planet Earth. So the increase is really, from a mathematical point of view, infinite. And the question is, how much stress can your cells take? It looks as if the bacteria, as we mentioned before, they use the energy to develop antibiotic resistance, which is good for them, but not for us, of course. And people don't realize that if you count the cells in your body, and depending on what kind of text you read, maybe half of all the cells in your body, they are bacteria. So when you said before, let's leave the bacteria, no, you haven't. They are here with us all the time. And if they are affected in such a way, and that has been shown by American scientists that exposed ordinary coli bacteria to everyday exposures from a second generation mobile telephony system, the old GSM, or to a super modern Wi-Fi router. And again, to make a long story short, they became again antibiotic resistant. And we need to pinpoint how this actually is brought about, and we don't know it yet. And we are trying constantly to get enough funding to go much deeper into this. And again, as you said before, it boils down to that in the meantime, I think you should take responsibility for your own personal health. And you lot that are listening to this, you are really the Nobel laureates in this field, you know. I mean, you know how to exercise, how to eat, and all of that. But for the rest of the general population, I would like to inform them a lot more. And I had, is it 2 years ago, I had a very interesting experience here in Stockholm. I was riding a commuter train. Sitting next to me was a very posh lady in her 60s, and she was fiddling around with her smartphone. And since no one knows who I am, I always take the possibility to inform and educate. So I leaned forward and said to her, do you know that the signals, the radiation your smartphone is using to communicate has been cancer classified by the World Health Organization in Geneva, in Switzerland? And she went ballistic, I will call it, and yelled at me that I was a stupid idiot. I didn't know what I was talking about, and I should just shut up. And I said, no, wait. I mean, you have your smartphone, you have Google. Couldn't you please Google WHO, brain tumor, and cell phone? And she did, and went silent for like a minute or two. And then slowly she looked up at me and said, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. It's all here. You were completely right. And now I get pissed again, she said, but not at you, but at our Swedish government, parliament, health authorities. Why haven't they informed me? You see, I'm not only a mother, I'm also a grandmother, she said. And 1 week ago, I gave my 14-year-old granddaughter a new smartphone, and now I regret it. At that point, I had to leave the train. And the last thing I said to her, and you mentioned it before, and I think that's a very important way actually to go. If people are concerned, don't be alarmed, don't be afraid. There are a lot of things to do. You should write to your local as well as national politician. Maybe it doesn't mean very much at the end, but you should, because you can always refer back to and say, well, we did try. And for instance, I have written to the United Nations, to the World Health Organization, to the Swedish government, etc., etc., etc. Most of them not even reply, not even an automatic reply, but I could face St. Peter at the pearly gates saying, I tried my hardest, I tried really. And also as citizens and consumers of all these devices, why don't you get together like parental groups? You can talk about is this with all the laptops and tablets and cell phones and so on, is it only good, or could there be backsides? And maybe you should invite like a person like me, an academic scientist, to give a lecture, an overview or something. And that could be done, of course, via these laptops like we do now,
Yeah.
but also in person. And there are very many excellent scientists out there. And you can compare the different messages. And also, I think you mentioned it before, the American saying of always follow the money. If someone says, "Oh, this is safe," and it reads, some telecom company on their jacket, maybe you should be a bit cautious with that information and say, "Hey, I need to do a bit more reading. I need to compare what you say with others." And also, I think it's very important to ask questions. And they should do it in a formal way, and that means writing them. And when you, for instance, ask a telecom provider or a government or a parliament or whatever a question, you should make sure that the question could only be answered with a yes or a no or I don't know or a number. And if they try, to start lengthy explanations, moving away from your question, stop them and say, no, no, no. I only want to have answer to this. And one classical question is, of course, can you guarantee, as the president of the United States, that these gadgets are 100% safe?
Interesting. Okay. Let's understand some of the other symptoms, or maybe disease is
Yeah,
a bit of
yeah,
a scary word, but I think it's the right word, that has been shown. I think that what I sort of expected from my childhood was that, oh, these things are causing genetic damage, right? And that means cancer. And maybe that's true. But what else? I mean, I've also heard you talk about this allergy thing,
yeah.
and I always thought, is that just like a way of describing some symptoms? But it turns out, no, it was actually an allergic reaction of
Yeah,
the immune system.
yeah, yeah.
Tell us some of these other things. And is cancer really the big thing?
Okay. For me, cancer is not maybe even a thing, because luckily, when you look into the general population, and I could go to Sweden, if we look at the specific brain tumors that have been associated with cell phone exposure, over time, there's actually a stable development. There is no increase, and in Sweden, it's even a slight decrease. And I have asked around in the entire world for statistically significant increases in incidents, new cases per year, and no one has them. So it seems to be a smaller, if maybe not even a problem, but at least a very small problem. There are animal studies pointing to a possible mechanism behind this, but let's leave that for the time being. You mentioned damage to DNA. Of course, that could result in cancer, I agree, but it could also result in a lot of other things. And one thing that has been seen in a number of different studies, and they could all be found on the internet, is that you have a deterioration of the function of the sperm cells and a decrease in fertility. And that's much more alarming in the sense that if we get a few extra patients, and I'm not trying to be cynical here, but our healthcare system could cope with that. But if we don't get any babies in the future, then we don't even have a healthcare system. And why I mention this, two Greek scientists, Magras and Xenos, they looked on the development of generations after exposing the mother and father. And for the first 4 generations, nothing particular happened. But the fifth generation turned out that the animals had become more or less completely infertile. That could mean that our grandchildren in about 150 years' time or 200 years' time will not be able to get any more babies because of something we did 2024 or even before 2024. So that's scary.
Yes.
Yeah. So and then it doesn't matter if you run 15 miles per day if your sperm cells doesn't work and the fertility. And as you know, for instance, in the US, Canada, in Europe, and so on, there is quite a dramatic decrease in sperm cell counts, motility, function, morphology, etc. So something is happening. The same with pollinators, insects like honeybees, a dramatic reduction. And if I could point into the camera, this width is the wavelength of the fifth generation mobile telephony. And that's actually the size of a honeybee. They are body resonant, so they pick up these energies extra well. And maybe their bacteria likes it, but the honeybees doesn't. And for instance, I know in Canada, they have lost more than 90%. The United States, they have lost more than 90% of bumblebees. In Europe, it's much better. We have lost in the order of 75% of these insects. But that means that maybe in the future you will not have fruits, vegetables, nuts, and so on that are dependent on insect pollination. You will have bread because rye and wheat and so on, they are wind pollinated. So you will eat bread, but nothing more than that. And again, I'm surprised that governments, parliaments, health authorities, and so on, radiation protection authorities, that they don't react and say, hey, we need to look very deeply into this. Very recently, we talked about the bacteria. I forgot to say that even soil bacteria have now become antibiotic resistant. So things are changing rapidly, and these super strains like E. coli, again, very recently, there are reports of very, very angry and fierce super E. coli bacteria, and people don't know how they have been developed. And I say, wait, couldn't you listen for a second to me? I have data. There are peer review based scientific papers and so on. Couldn't you read that and think, could that be a culprit, a negative culprit? And as I said before, I would hate to come to the pearly gates, St. Peter saying, Olle, why didn't you speak up? You saw it, you understood. Why didn't you tell people? Why didn't you warn them? Instead, it's all right if he says, well, you tried your hardest, you failed, but you tried at least.
Yeah. Well, so people who are doubting this, I think most of them aren't doubting the impact of plastics everywhere and pesticides everywhere and pollution everywhere. This just sounds like another form of pollution
Yeah.
that we have to find a way to minimize our exposure to it, right? I wash off my fruits and vegetables before I eat them and things like that. So, there's big questions here, whether the bees are because of pesticides or electromagnetic fields or what, or all of the above. I mean, as a society, we really have got to get these answers. But for today, things that I can do for myself and for my family, I'll just say that I regret buying cell phones for my children.
Yeah.
I remember doing it. There was a sale and I knew how much they would enjoy it. And I thought, oh, for Christmas. And we bought my 3 daughters cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
And without knowing anything about these fields, I've just regretted it because it has just sort of wrecked their behavior. They're just addicted to the phones.
Yeah.
Almost almost as bad as I am. And I regret that I am addicted to the phones. And it's tougher for me to quit because, my business and so much of my communication is through that. But for the children, I think is actually another thing that we have to be really careful of. As they're growing, they must be more vulnerable than, an old fart like me. Still, the conversation for today is about the older athlete and older athletes like me who have kids or maybe grandkids and they've got cell phones. You should deal with that. You really should think about that. But tell us about this allergy thing. I just was sort of stunned. And that's where it started, right? It was this electrical allergy or something you called it at the very beginning. And it turned out it was actually, or at least you have discovered that it really is an effect on mast cells.
Yeah, true. And before we go there, I would just say regarding your three daughters, I mean, the good father bought the cell phones and you were very kind and you wanted to make them happy. And maybe you should have bought them, each one of them, a carrot instead. The carrot, is covered in insecticides and in plastics and in a lot of different chemicals, etc. So whatever you do, you need to think a bit, what is actually the best? Then coming to the allergic bit, we started, as you said, to take skin samples from people that claimed to be unwell in front of computer screens. And to make a very long story short, it turned out that they had a very high increase in number of so-called mast cells. And it's not about telecom mast. Mast cells is from the German language, saying that these cells look swollen in the microscope. And they contain granules that release heparin and histamine, and they are the key molecules for allergic, asthmatics, and other oversensitivity reactions. So the jigsaw puzzle really fitted very well, all the pieces. And then we said, what about normal healthy volunteers? We took medical and dental students. We placed them with their back towards ordinary household television sets and household computer screens. We exposed them for 8 hours, and they should then tell us all their reactions, how did it feel, all the subjective sensations. And while doing so, we also took skin biopsies before, during, and after this exposure test. And again, to make a long story short, none had anything to tell us except that it was boring to sit. Yeah, they should report everything. It was boring to sit 8 hours with the back towards television and computer screens at a distance of about 40 centimeters, which is the viewing distance. They have no other sensations. I asked them, do you feel any itch, pricking pain, redness, heat sensation, something? No. But in their skin biopsies, and the earliest we took was after 2 hours, there was a dramatic increase in the number of mast cells again, as if we would have exposed them like to uranium, plutonium, radium, or to strong ultraviolet light, UVC, or to radar beams, or to X-ray, and so on. But we hadn't. We had just placed them in front of safe household gadgets, and still their body reacted so very quickly. And that, of course, made us very cautious. How should we do various exposure tests in the future if also the general population reacts, the healthy population? And shortly afterwards, another research group showed that the lymphocytes of the immune system also reacts in normal healthy volunteers in exactly the same manner as in persons with electrohypersensitivity, the latter feeling something, the first not knowing. So we have to draw the conclusion that normal healthy people like yourself and me, we do have molecular and cellular reactions going on in our body, but we are just not aware of it. Whereas the electrohypersensitive people, they are aware of it, so they function as the classical canary bird in the coal mine. They say that something is wrong here, and they have an avoidance reaction to an environment that is, from my point of view, extremely burdened, I would say toxic, with electromagnetic man-made signals, and they react to it.
I used to spend a lot of time outdoors. I was a mountaineer, and I would go into places, and some of this time I didn't have a cell phone because there wasn't such a thing. But obviously, even when I did have a cell phone, I didn't bring it, or I left it in the car because what good was it going to do me? I couldn't get a signal, that sort of thing. People generally report feeling great when they go out into these places. They feel great, and they don't know why. They say, "Oh, it's the natural air, it's the light environment. You're getting natural sunlight." Well, maybe you're just not getting bombarded with these artificial electromagnetic fields.
Yeah, I have an experience from that. Quite a number of years ago, we were allowed to borrow a Siemens from Germany cubicle that is completely shielded. It was underground, and we brought both normal healthy volunteers as well as electron hypersensitive people there, and they should just come and sense the locality. And they didn't know what was special about it. And everyone said exactly what you say now. And even myself, I remember, I felt very lightheaded and relieved of something. And of course, all the electromagnetic fields of the Stockholm society, they were gone inside there. There were no such exposures. So maybe it's like, breathing out. Yeah, all the cells just good. And then we wanted to continue to do controlled exposure experiments, but unfortunately, we never got the necessary funding for it. But it's still a very important study. And we also suggested that we should be allowed to take a small Swedish town, and we choose a town called Ljungby in Småland. It's in the southern part of Sweden. And for a year or two, we should be allowed to take away all the exposures. They should not be able to have anything unshielded, unwired or wireless. It should all be shielded and wired and no exposures. Unfortunately, we were not again allowed to do it. And the only thing we were interested in was exactly what you say now. All the 13,000 people living in Ljungby, would they, during a year or two, start to report that we are feeling so much better? And could we then discern from not spending time on your smartphone, but instead being smart and spend time out trailing, walking, running, walking your dog, whatever? And it's still in my agenda. I would love to do this kind of study,
Yeah. Okay, so with the time we have left, I'd like to get into the, what should we do? I understand that when people talk about, oh, well, is my Wi-Fi just as bad as my microwave oven?
Okay.
And people say, oh, it's totally different, right? The microwave oven is 1,000 watts, and and your Wi-Fi is half a watt. So it's nowhere near the same thing.
But of course, your microwave oven is shielded. So the shielding constant is in the order of 1 million times shielding. So it's weaker than your Wi-Fi router. So again, as I said before, I would start looking around in my environment, asking myself and my family, do we need to brush our teeth with electric toothbrushes, or could we use manual ones? Could we whip the cream manually instead of with an electric whipper? Do we need to have mobile phones? Are we that mobile? Or could we instead use shielded, wired telephones? Could we make something shielded with our laptops, computers, and so on? And if you look around on the internet, there is quite a number of companies that sell both shields of different types. You can shield your bed, for instance, with a canopy. There is shielding paint for your room. You can shield your Wi-Fi router, etc. So there are quite a number of gadgets you can spend money on. But as we talked before this interview, I would warn to spend any time of, I think you call it snake oil, in the sense of stickers, pendants, crystals, and so on. They will only empty your wallet. They will not protect you in any way. So be careful, And but if you use school book physics, then you can shield and also produce distance. You said you would go out into the mountains, and of course, automatically you have produced a distance to base stations of various types.
Unless I have my cell phone in my pocket, which has got a very weak signal, and it's like radiating heat. It's going so hard looking for a signal.
And as I said before, you use the word weak signal. What weak? It's allowed to expose you a quintillion times higher than natural background into which you were born.
I was talking about the cellular signal being so far away was a weak signal, and my phone has to use more power to connect to it.
I'm sorry, you broke up there for a bit. That's completely true. The further away you are, the higher the exposure from your personal gadget. So I think your advice is much better. Leave it in the car.
Okay, and so getting back to this idea of an 80-20 rule, it would seem like my electric toothbrush is probably, it's doing something, but, it's like 2 minutes a day. Whereas the Wi-Fi is on 24 hours a day. My cell phone, I used to only wear shirts to work that had a pocket on my chest. So I could have my cell phone in my pocket on my skin the entire day. Okay, so anything that we're doing where it's on your skin, okay, so that should be a priority. Figure out how to stop doing that. Anything that's like in your environment and it's on while you're sleeping. I mean, come on, you need Wi-Fi while you're sleeping? Why expose yourself to it? Even just with the slight chance that there's some problem, just turn it off. I read that my smart TV, anything with the word smart, you should say danger. But my smart TV, even when it's off, is still putting out a signal because the device is looking for things to connect to. And so I'm exposed to that. So you can't just turn things off. You've got to unplug them.
And as you say, when you buy different things to your home, like a new fridge or refrigerator or freezer or whatever, they are nowadays often coming with an Internet of Things connection. So they will radiate you looking for something to communicate with. And if you don't have it, they will still be exposing you. And you should remember that a number of scientists have looked on the leakage of the blood-brain barrier, and it took only 1 minute to have it start leaking, and at an exposure that was 5,000 times under the official guideline. So even if you feel, it's so short and it's so weak, no. The cells, the molecules and so on, they are reacting to this. And the reason we don't know if it reacted even quicker is because the scientists thought that 1 minute would be safe. So that was the shortest. Then they had like 5 minutes, 10 minutes and so on. But already at the safe 1 minute exposure, the blood-brain barrier started to leak. And me being a neuroscientist, I can tell you that's not something you want. You don't want the blood-brain barrier to leak.
Okay, so maybe it's a 2x2, and things that are going to be close to you, like your toothbrush, even though it's short, it's very close. And if it is easy to do without, well then that should be on the short list. And things where you're exposing either a lot or for long periods of time, even if it's not right up against your skin, like a Wi-Fi thing. I mean, my Wi-Fi, well, it's actually like 2 feet away from me. So maybe that's a bad example, but so, look for the opportunities. I am not going to give up living in a house and most of the advantages of modern civilization. But if I can knock down from a quintillion times the natural background to, a million times, only by just giving up some easy stuff or just switching stuff off when I go to bed.
Yeah.
It just seems stupid not to.
Yeah, do it. I mean, just do it. That's what I would say too, But again, as a scientist, I have to point out that there is no real guarantee. Maybe you need to go even further. And for your audience, maybe they feel very stressed now, they don't want to give up all these fun toys. But remember that, for instance, William Shakespeare and Albert Einstein, they didn't have anything of this, and they are completely unsurpassed in brilliance, So you can become a professor even without them,
That's a good message. Okay, so let's wrap this up. This has been so good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much to you too.
Is there some way that you would point people to find more information about this subject, find you, donate to your efforts to do more research, things like that?
Yeah, I know that you will give that kind of information after this interview, so I would direct people there. But don't trust anyone initially. Compare the information, and as I said before, start asking simple questions. Is this safe for me and my family? Yes or no? And how can you guarantee it? And I see that there is a very detailed discussion already at, for instance, the American presidential level at the White House. They are very much aware of this, and there are ideas. And also among your audience, maybe there are inventors and entrepreneurs, anyone coming up with tomorrow's green, human, and environmental friendly wireless technology. They will be the big winners. So there is an upside to the downside as well, And I hope that, of course, there will be a Swedish inventor that will come up with that, because then Sweden will be very rich,
All right, it'll be the next Nokia. Okay.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been really great. You have a great day.
The same. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining my conversation with Professor Olle Johansson. I hope you found this information useful, and I hope you'll take steps to protect yourself and your family.